Welcome to What's a Beautiful Life Anyway? I'm your host, Jill Bennett. This is the channel that shares ideas to help you live your best life, because life can be beautiful if you live consciously. Welcome to What's a Beautiful Life Anyway? We all know that to live our best and most beautiful life, we need to be in our best health. And my guest today can help you do just that. It's Dr. Pat Boulogne. Welcome.
Thank you. I am so happy to get here, and I'm so thrilled that you pronounced my name correctly.
I was a bit worried then that I hadn't pronounced it correctly, but
I know
I'm glad I did.
it's those French words that end in G and E that do it to you every time.
Even
But
worse in
thank you.
Spanish. Even
Oh,
worse in Spanish. I was looking at it from the Spanish point of view, and I thought, "Oh, that's really difficult because G is like oh, like you're clearing your throat.
mhm.
J is Jota. So the pronunciation is very different. So I'm glad it's French pronunciation because it makes it a bit easier.
It is, and it is just like, and I still have people slaughter it. But so I'm really glad that you said it correctly. Bingo, first time. Thank you so much. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
fantastic, fantastic. So we're talking at opposite ends of the globe, really. Pat is in sunny Florida. You are in Florida,
I
and
am.
you're still in Florida, and I'm in Mallorca at the moment. And just to introduce a bit of background about Pat, Pat is a mentor and a coach. She's an executive life empowerment strategist, and she helps executives and entrepreneurs to achieve their greatest goals in less time with proven science-based programs. Pat, I love it that you have both medical and functional medicine training. You are, in fact, Dr. Pat. So tell us how you started your career.
Well, when I started my career, I was actually, a piece of it without going into like tremendous detail. When I was in my undergraduate in college, I did a independent study at the University of Michigan. And I had a friend at the same time that I was doing that was on my case about what are you going to do with the rest of your life?
Mm.
And so, and I had all pre-med courses. And in this particular story, I would go around the hospital as an advocate, asking people, "How are you doing? Do you need anything? Did you forget anything?" Because I only saw them the first day that they were there, or within 24 hours before their operation or whatever. I never saw them after that, so I got to see them still relatively in good shape. And so, one day when I was going on my rounds, I was cut through the chemotherapy ward, and there was a gentleman who was walking down the aisleway. And I walked up to him and asked him that. I said, "I don't think I know your name." He goes, "It doesn't matter if you know my name. I'm going to die in 6 weeks anyway." And I went, "Wow, how do you know that?" And he said, "Well, that's what they told me." And I said, "Huh." I said, "If it was me, not that you're asking, but if it was me, this is the last place in the world I'd want to die." And he just looked at me very surprised, and he said, "Well, what would you do?" And I said, "I'd go out and do anything I've ever wanted to do, however I wanted to do it and go out and like, on fire." And I was 27 years old, 26 going to 27, right? And that was a fall term. And he just looked at me and he said, "Well, you're a breath of fresh air," in a little kind of grumpy way. And I said, "Well, I wish you the best. I've got a bunch of patients still to see today." He goes, "What do you do anyway?" I told him I was an advocate. He goes, "I wish I would have met you years ago." and and then we just had a kind of a fun conversation and then left. And I finished my day. And when I was going by, the person who was my watchdog for my independent study there, she had said, "Pat, come here." And I'm thinking, as you know, that you knew you were in trouble to begin with. And she said, "Why did you tell that guy to leave the hospital?" I went, because I totally forgot the conversation. I said, "I didn't tell him to leave the hospital." And I said, "Who are you talking about?" And then she told me, I said, "Oh, I told him if it were me, and I was in the same situation, I would do X, Y, and Z. He goes, well, he left the hospital. And the inside of me was so happy. I just went, oh my God. I go, good for you. Because if you're going to die, to me at that time, I probably could have changed my verbiage, but I didn't know any better. Um, but, when she said that he left the hospital, I was rejoicing for him. I said, I hope he outbeats them and lives 6 years
Yeah,
and that kind of thing, and just send him goodwill. At the
yeah.
same time, my friend who was bugging me about what I was going to do with the rest of my life enrolled in chiropractic school down in Atlanta, Georgia. I was in Michigan at the time. And so I called him up when I got out of there that day and I said, can you have them mail me an application form? And he goes, call them up and do it yourself. And I said, you're there, right? And I said, just grab one and send it to me in the mail. And he did, and I applied to go to school and I never looked back, and when I told my father I was going to go, he told me he was cutting me off. and and because that was not his chosen profession, he wanted me to be an electrical engineer. I said they're kind of the same, it's just like I do the body and electrical engineering does AC/DC, and that he didn't think that was very funny, but I still went and I did it on student loans. And I only had one glitch one short time that a friend helped me out money wise. But I finished it and it was the best thing I've ever done. I've seen so many people have miracles in their life and change the
Yeah.
trajectory of where they were heading.
It's I can't believe doctors still tell people when they have a limited amount of time,
Oh,
because really, how long you've got is entirely up to you. And if you're told you've got 6 weeks, so many people then. I always remember a story someone told me years ago, and it was about a friend of his who always said, "Oh, 30 is so old. I'm not going to live past 30. Oh, 30 is so old." On his 30th birthday, he dropped down dead. And
oh
he'd
my
never,
God.
he wasn't ill, but he'd
Hmm.
almost, we are self-fulfilling prophecies.
Absolutely.
And you have to believe it's a privilege to get old and just live
Yep.
your best life, look after yourself, be grateful and enjoy everything.
So here's my first tip today. Anytime anybody tells you that you have X, Y, and Z, they don't appreciate your value, you just look at them and mentally freeze them in a block of ice and push that energy away.
Yeah,
Um, and you also can say out loud, cancel, cancel,
yeah,
slap and walk away because you don't have to accept that as an end of story because there's always something you can do.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a
Yep.
great piece of advice.
Yep.
Brilliant piece of advice. So you trained to be a chiropractor and you helped so many people, and I've seen testimonials about you online, and you've really helped so many people. You then retired and then started again. So why? What? Tell us how that happened.
Well, I got burnt out, and so I put my practice up for sale and sold it within less than a year. And I moved to Boston. And when I was in Boston, I never told anybody what I did. I mean, it's just somebody saw me in the elevator one day when I was moving books in, and he said, "Merck's Manual, you must be a doctor." And I just said, "I'm Pat. How are you?" Just and what's your name? I'm Dr. So and so. And he was so identified with that I'm a doctor thing, and I actually got out of the elevator without saying anything to him. So it's nice to meet you. Have a great day. It's my floor. And um, but you know, I started walking around Boston and I walked every day. I went to the gym in the morning and rode a bike for 45 minutes, 45 minutes in the water and ran in the water, didn't float or swim. I ran. And then in the afternoon, later in the afternoon, I'd walk from uh, the uh, financial district, as the area is called, North End, to the Back Bay and then back. That was another like 4 miles. So I was really active. And I just had a lot of observation. There was an area called Post Office Square, and in Post Office Square there was, I used to sit there and have coffee or tea like in the afternoon, and I'd watch everybody come out of like Fidelity, Charles Schwab's, all the big financial people there, and plus even the little ones, and they would congregate and have lunch there, and they would eat like like mice, and and they're very constricted in their body language. And I just noticed to me, it was just like, God, these people look so sick and they don't look happy. So occasionally I would ask somebody when I was walking, more than occasionally, but I would occasionally ask people when I was walking, I'd take a look at them, especially if there's like nobody home. I'd say, excuse me, can I ask you a question? Excuse me, I'm talking to you. You know, I would ask them if they thought they were a human being or a person. And that was my first question. And they, 9 times out of everybody always said they were a human being. I didn't have one person who said no, except for one person who said he was both. And I said, you must be a medical doctor. And he said, I am. So, that's like, now we know the reason. Now, when your medical doctor is a human being and a person. But the people that I saw, it just like, they were pale, they had no color, they looked stressed. They, people who I thought were like, should like in their 40s were really like 32, 35. And they also dressed like very old, and they became old way before their time. And so, and the color wasn't in their face. And they had no sense of humor.
Mm.
That is a trait for definitely being in Boston, in case anybody goes. It's just like you can find them, but it's just like you don't, generally speaking, those who are working 9 to 5 don't have that sense of humor all the time. So, that was my first observation. The other thing is I read an article about that same time. And when I read this article, it's put out by the CDC, and it was a blood and urine analysis of over 2,500 people. And they discovered that every person in that random sample across the United States had all 212 potentially dangerous chemicals in their blood and urine. I
Yeah.
went, how can that be? How can it be that like so many people in this sample study, when I consider the CDC is actually telling the truth, the, a time where they had all these chemicals in their system. No wonder they were sick. They were tired, then they were fat,
Yeah.
or getting fatter and getting sicker, and they didn't know it. They didn't know why they didn't feel good. They just knew they didn't feel good. And so, it was just so in my face. I went, wow. I said, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something, because if I didn't open my mouth, nobody else would. And I went
Mm.
from Cape Cod, where you have salty breezes, Patty Page's song, if you got a sand dune and salty air, to being in Boston, where it was really congested with a lot of people that were really, really high stress. So my experience in looking at that, I went, wow, people are sick and they don't know it. That was my bottom line summation. And I decided that if I was going to do something, that I needed to change that. And if I could, how I could change it is by writing the book, by getting people more aware about their health. And that's the reason why I wrote my bestseller, Why Are You Sick, Fat, and Tired? And that's where it started at. It didn't end there. It took a couple years for me to get that all together. But that's what happened when I was in Boston. It was powerful. It was like a mic drop,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
realization.
The most shocking piece of research I ever read about was where they took the blood from the placentas of newborn babies, and they had so many toxins in them. And that was while they were in the womb,
Well,
they were getting these
well,
toxins.
there's 3 reasons why people get sick. One is trauma, the other one is toxins, and the other one is thoughts. So on the trauma part, 9 out of 10 children who are born have some level of cervical damage in their neck. So
Yeah.
that's their first inflammation, which starts at day one,
Yeah.
from being pulled, turned, twisted, to get out of the womb, into life, and if you look at that very true statement that you did, because that was done, there was a study done by the British Journal of Medicine, and also the JAMA, JAMA, um, in the United States, that relates back to that. You can look up on PubMed or Lancet, for that information also, but whatever the mother eats goes from the mother through the mother to and through the child and registers in the placenta. But that's scary.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's scary.
It's
I
very
don't we didn't
scary.
have that when we were growing up.
No, no, I'm sure we didn't. So every individual has got unique health and wellness needs. We know that. I mean, there are so many similarities as to why we get ill, but most people have individual needs. To start some sort of personal transformation, to be a more vibrant person, how can people start? What's the best way for them to start?
Well, a lot of people don't understand where their bottom line or foundational line is, or where they are going back to basics. And so if like sometimes people go going back to basics, that's like getting my food from, my frozen dinners at, the grocery store. And because they say they're healthy on them, but if you actually read labels, labels will tell you everything. So I don't, it doesn't bother me that somebody can't pronounce a word. There's a lot of words I can't pronounce either, especially if they're in Chinese. But um, but the, but the point of that is that you have to know the side effects of the words that you don't understand how to pronounce.
Yeah,
And when you start looking it up, you start thinking about, okay, so what else can I buy? Because that doesn't work. And if you know truly what to do to be healthy, then you would want to change something that you have control over, and you have control over everything that goes into your mouth.
yeah,
So looking at, from the time in, you also have control over your thoughts. And having control of your thoughts is crucial. And matter of fact, you have to master them.
yeah. Yeah, that's so true, so true. And I agree that we're slightly different in Central Europe. Not some The UK are not far behind the US for having fast food and ready meals. But in Europe, especially in Spain, Italy, France, we tend to cook more from scratch. And because that's such a normal thing here, you don't find many ready meals. We do have
Mhm.
the odd supermarket here who have started doing some, but generally, people it's just part of the culture to cook from scratch, which I think is
Well,
wonderful.
it is wonderful as long as your foods are not sprayed. And Spain is
Yeah.
actually one of the highest countries that are in cahoots with the United States for using Monsanto type of, glycophosphates and spraying them on foods to supposedly get rid of, you know, um, different insects, which are supposed to be there to begin with. you
Yeah.
know, um, and because, it's like the cycle of life. There's certain things that have to happen in a certain progression, like even like how you digest your food. There's certain things that have to happen when you're digesting your food at certain places. And when it doesn't happen, or if there's damage there, then those foods have a tendency to leach out into the bloodstream and then have to be processed by the liver, and then try to get out of your body some way, either through getting to the toilet through your intestinal tract, which if it's damaged, it repeats the cycle
Yeah.
again and again until it's overwhelmed. And then that's when those toxins in the body get stored in blood, brain, bone, and fat.
Yeah.
But the idea and the ideal way is for you eat them, and process them and things so that the liver is not overburdened to begin with. The foods are absorbed in the correct places and you don't start developing autoimmune diseases. Then the liver works, and then if the liver works and the gut's working, so you always got to fix the gut first
Mm.
and make sure the gut's functioning very well. And then it can go into the intestinal tract, or if it's small enough molecule, and go to the bladder, and they both end up in the toilet where they belong.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're
Mhm.
right, actually. I hadn't thought about the spraying of the. Ah, tell us a bit more about, you have a 6-week pilot course running at the moment called High Performance Mind and Health. Working title, we'll call it, just in case it
Yep.
changes. Tell us about it. It sounds really interesting.
Well, the high performance part won't change, but the rest of it is subject to change. Um, it's a course that is like, when I talked before about people didn't know where to go back to basics, it's the course that actually shows you where to go back to basics. And it shows you what are the basics, and then you can work from there to say no cart like the no horse before the cart, no cart before the horse. I always say that mixed up.
Yeah.
And so because you want to be able to know your body, and you want to know what you're driving. So if you know where your basics are, then you know whether or not you're driving as a body a jalopy, which is like a rundown car, a Mustang, or some car in between a Mustang, and for your high performance car, like a Ferrari,
Yeah.
or a Bentley or something like that. And so when you know what car you're driving, you know what kind of investment that you have to take on your part in order to achieve that high performance consistently. So in the cart before the horse theory, what you want to do is you want to make sure all your I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and your ducks are aligned, so that when you bring the horse around and you attach the horse to the cart, because horses don't push, they pull, and you have it all hooked up properly and all the pieces of the puzzle are there, you can sit behind the horse very confidently and be the leader of your own life. And, and that metaphor for that, then when you crack that whip, you got to know that you're driving, now you know what you're working with and you know what you've got going for you so that this is the positive, this is the negative, this is where I've got to focus my time, energy, and money at so that I can get unstuck, stay focused, move forward in all aspects of my life and have the best life ever.
Yeah.
So, but you just have to know when you get the how to drive the cart. And I always tell the story. I think I told you the story. I was in Essex, England, and this guy, did I ever tell you the story about the Ferrari? This guy was a friend of my boyfriend's, and he said, "Have you ever driven a Ferrari before?" And I said, "No, but I would love to." He goes, "Well, let's go." And the car was already turned around in the driveway, so I didn't have to back it up, or I would have known the end of the story beforehand and how to avoid the problem at the end of the story. And so we went down and, Essex is quite curvy, and I wasn't going fast anyway. And he never told me about how the car functions. I knew how to start the car, but the car is already running. And I knew how to get the car and drive, but nobody ever told me how to stop the car. In this particular car, the brake paddles were on the steering wheel.
Uh,
And I started to go up to this curve and he's going, Pat, you might want to slow down. And I said, and I'm looking, I go, where's the brakes? I go, oh my, it was an oh my God moment. We're all going to die. And, and he said, they're on the wheel, it's a paddle on the wheel. And he said it was singular. So I just hit the right paddle, because I didn't want to touch anything. I didn't know what it was. And what it did is it locked the brake on one side, and the back of it kind of slid out and hit a curb and sliced from the driver's side door to the back panel to the end of it. And we stopped. And I just said to him, I'm so sorry. I just came out of school, so I had absolutely no money. So and I went, I'm so sorry, I can't pay for that. So the moral of the story was and is that if he would have told me and gave me better information
yeah.
about how to drive his car, he wouldn't have probably had around $7,000 of damage on the car, because of that. And and he said, don't worry. He said, the car's insured. Um, but it was a learning lesson for him too, likewise, because we have to know how we're driving our car. We've got to know the pieces of the puzzle. We cannot leave it to somebody else's whim, whether they teach you how to eat or not how to eat. You've got to take command and accountability for your life, and in all aspects of it. Because when you get that, that down, then you can have better results and you can even be even more successful without thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
sounds pretty good to me too. So your book is called Why You're Fat, Sick and Tired. And I think, I mean, I read through it on a flight between the UK and Mallorca and was looking at all the questionnaires involved. And it's a great thing to, I mean, maybe could people work through that and then see whether or not the course might be of use to them? Would it work together like that? Is that
Well,
possible?
in the book, one of the blessings about the second edition is that I have 7 questions inside the book, a couple on the back cover, but there's 7 questions inside the book that qualify you for whether or not you need to do this book. And so when and the reason why I did that is because I wanted people to be more focused because it made them understand, how's your health been the last couple of years? And, I had somebody who was so proud, he's going to say, nope, nope, nope. Because if you said a yes, then you kind of like flunked that test. And I said to him, what about over-counter, medications? And he said, well, everyone takes them. I said, doesn't make them right. I said, do you take over-the-counter medication? It's a yes or no answer. We're not talking, this isn't rocket science. And
Mm,
so I was having a conversation with him. He said, well, I do. I said, great, you just failed. So you should get the book because even if it isn't for you, you definitely know somebody. The statistics especially in the United States, is 1/3 of the population is diagnosed with heart disease and or diabetes. And diabetes and heart disease are definitely connected to each other.
yeah.
In 2030, 50% of the population of the United States will be diagnosed with some chronic illness or disease. Why do you want to wait till then? When
Yeah.
you have an opportunity to go through a book of questions that looks deeply into each one of your organ systems, like a Swiss watch, because when these don't work, they break. And like your body, every piece of the puzzle that's in there, all 11 organ systems and systems in the body have got to work in conjunction with each other. So it works as a guidebook, an advocating tool, you know, and a workbook so that you can go from point A to point Z and identify your weakest link. And you'll also show you where you have your strongest links because you need those. You want to know, like, what do I got on, who's got my back on this one, you know? But it's like when you can do that, you can tie that into a whole graph that you can see what your pattern is because the pattern is important.
Yeah.
And if you know what the pattern is, you'll see like, oh, this is over here, and this relates to this. And if you don't understand that, you can take it to a practitioner who does lifestyle or functional medicine, and they can help you decipher that. Or you can contact me. I'm more than happy to do that too. And that's a complimentary gift I give for buying my book, so I can give something back to you, and that I can hopefully make even more massive differences in your life so that you can thrive.
Yeah, yeah. I did
I
feel
love the
quite
book.
good when I was answering the questions in my head on the plane because I was reading it
Yep.
on my iPad. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I don't. I say I don't take over the counter medications
Hmm.
because if I have a headache, then I work out why I've got a headache. Have I not drunk enough fluid? Have I you know, being in a very hot environment. There's always a reason, isn't there? There's always a
Hmm.
reason why
Well,
something happens. So
just for your listeners' purposes, when depending upon where your headache is, in Chinese medicine tells you a lot. So,
yeah,
for instance, if it's on your forehead, your forehead is all about your stomach. Your sides here are gallbladder, the top is liver, and the back is small intestine, urinary bladder, but your small intestine, stomach. And so you can always see where you have, where your headache is, and it can give you clues to like, oh yeah, yeah, 2 days ago I had that fried food. Because people can have reactions to food that they're not good for them, like 8 days later.
yeah,
And it's not always right away,
yeah,
for some people. So there's a method to that. And so that's my next tip. was like is where the headache's at because you have to say, well, what is it? You can always start out with dehydration as a
yeah,
as a general cause straight across the board. And sometimes just putting a little bit of lemon juice in water helps diminish that headache really quick. And laying down for 15 minutes, a little ice on your top of your neck, with your eyes closed, because maybe you just need a break.
yeah.
you
What
know,
what
uh,
what did that one indicate? If it's
the
on the
stomach.
oh, because I get if I do get a headache, it tends to be there.
Yeah, like sinuses relate to stomach too. I mean, that's usually say a
Mm,
sinus headache,
yeah.
is what a general like terminology is for that. But when someone tells me that they have a headache there, then I go, what did you eat? And what did you put your food with? Because sometimes how we combine foods isn't so healthy either.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I was in a hurry, I know I shouldn't have got that, fish and chips, but yeah, it's my favorite. I'm thinking, well, if you're going to eat fish and chips, have a big glass of water with a lot of lemon juice in it so
Yeah.
your gallbladder doesn't blow out. Because because you have to be able to have that, the gallbladder working. So, for instance, in that case, so it coats the stomach so the acid that's there doesn't eat a hole in it, or you start creating the terminology of GERD. That's what happens with GERD is that you don't have the right amount of bile and that there's something going on in that system. That's how I would look at it from like in a Chinese and even a Western, alternative method.
Yeah, 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 because we've got our meridians, haven't we? And
Hmm.
we haven't got
Yep.
time to go into that now, but they all link. So I love it. I love,
Yep.
reflexology and Chinese medicine, just wonderful. I also love the equation you have on your website, which says that positive mental attitude plus positive mindset plus superior wellness initiatives equals success. And we know that part of that is having good morning routines. There's so many famous, very successful people who all put it down to having a good morning routine. And you've got a lovely complimentary download on your website, which has got strategies for waking up more productive in 5 easy steps. Tell us a little bit about that, please, Pat.
Well, there's a thing about habits, turning them into rituals. And when you have a rituals, they're with you for your life, as long as you don't get derailed for some reason and you're someplace else where you can't do specific things. So I always ask people, and I recommend for people to always have water and hydrate when they first thing when they get up in the morning. Your whole body will love you. And at least 16 ounces. And so there's things that when you do those rituals that you can be even more productive in that day. So, wellness initiatives include, proper diet and nutrition, proper exercise, proper sleep, that positive mental attitude mindset. That's the fourth pillar. And the last one is a proper posture, which is biomechanics and structure and function. Because if you don't have good structure, you can't have good function. Something's got to give at some point in time.
Yeah,
So that equation, rolls over to, even like, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, and financial, because you have to be able to make good thoughts and you have to have those good thoughts and turn that over into good deeds, in the such, so that, equation, you know, um, is pretty self-encompassing, and you have to have the habits to do it. They say it takes, statistically speaking, the average is 66 days to take a habit into a ritual, and that it can take you can do it in 18, but it's usually around 265 or 254 days, which is about 8 months. And so if you're consistent about picking one thing to do, you can do it for 21 days, and then repeat it for the next 90 days, which actually brings you up. Even I'm not a mathematician, it actually brings you up to 111 days, which is more than 66. So if
yeah,
you can just pick one thing that you are committed to, and commitments like being, like knowing that you are committed to yourself, because a lot of people aren't. Because a lot of like when people say like, oh, I can't commit to that, I said, then you don't trust yourself.
mm,
That trust part of that commitment has got to be in there too for you to be successful. But I love that as that was a brainstorm at I think 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning one night. I sat up and I wrote that out, and I closed my book and I put it down. And then I figured I used it about a year later, and for that purpose, to explain that a little bit more thoroughly,
yeah, yeah.
right?
I think it's great. It's so good. And the whole thing about habits becoming rituals, originally they always used to say 3 weeks, didn't they?
Mhm.
Based on scientists who were training to go into space, and they were given goggles that would make
Mhm.
them see everything upside down. And what they found was that after about 3 weeks, even with the goggles on, people were seeing things the right way up because their brains had adjusted. And they thought,
Right.
oh, it must take 3 weeks to make something a habit, when in
Right.
fact we know,
Well, that's where the 21 days comes in.
yeah,
So,
that's
you
right.
know, at
That's where
that first part of that 21 days. And we all know if you've seen those people who have wrote letters and they leave out specific, they change the arrangement of them. And sometimes you can pick that up and you can just read it as if it was all perfect,
yeah,
until the very end. Your brain's so powerful,
yeah.
where your mind goes, your body follows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Definitely, it's mindset. It's getting that right, isn't it?
Hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
couple of other things on your website that will really help our listeners. One is the complimentary discovery session. So tell us a little bit about what happens in those, Pat.
In my complimentary discovery session, when someone schedules it with me, I just look and see. For me, it's a way to get acquainted with you, to find out, what your concerns are, where do you want to go with it, and maybe what should you do about it, and what's your next best step? Because it's not always with me, and sometimes, when I work with somebody, we're not a good fit. So, but I might know the right person to be able to say, here's your best person to go see that, or go do this research first, or go do this, science-based questionnaire first, because it will give me more information about you, because I could help you even more. Because
Yeah,
I think the ability, sometimes we get confused when we get overwhelmed, we don't make good decisions, and when it comes to your health, one of my goals is to almost like make a checklist for you. So after you get done with that checklist, you can go, oh, I now know what to do. It's be very, very clear, and you have higher clarity and higher awareness about where your health is or isn't, and what you have to do to make it better for yourself. And so, that because we all don't want to become burdens. I mean, when we were kids, we never grew up saying, "Oh, I want to get sick when I grow up." And That is, people don't walk around saying that. Matter
No.
of fact, the reality is that when we start getting older and our parents start to get sick, and right, I mean, I had that experience, you have that experience, that you're going like, oh my God, you're all of a sudden you became, the lead, and your parents led you till that time. But it's just like now you get to be the lead because you're making those other decisions for that. And so the burden of that, though, is huge because it affects every aspect of your life. So there's ways that you can minimize that by finding out and keeping ahead of the game, and like periodically, my book, I tell buy it in paper, because the reason for that is so it's in your face. So like every 6 months, just do a check-in.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to pay more attention to my gut. Let's see what's going on with my gut, and
Yeah.
like, what can I do about it? And if you don't know what to do about it, you can always make time with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
No,
know, that,
mine's always my gut.
mhm.
Always.
Where our
Because we've
emotions
got,
all go there. We all know if
yeah.
we ever got, you don't sleep, if you got something on your mind,
Yeah.
and you ate late, you're like, forget about that. You're just going to have to like, you're thinking, okay, so how can I get past this? Like, what is it
Yeah.
that's bothering me? And if you can do something about it, another tip, go do it. If you
Yes.
can't do something about it, record it, type it up, do whatever you like, write it out, and do it and get it over with so that you can, and give yourself permission, that self-care love that it's okay to go to sleep now,
Yeah.
and that when you wake up, you're going to hit the ground running and you're going to be the best you ever were that day.
Yeah, that's really good advice as well. Well, I will post the link up to the complimentary discovery session so that people
Right.
have a chance to have a look at that and book one of those. There's also something else on your website about taking the short assessment to receive the health snapshot. We'll also post a link up to that, and there's a little video for people to watch first of all, which is great.
And
And
that's on the homepage.
that's on the homepage, so that's
Yep, on the
definitely worth
homepage.
a few minutes of people's lives
Hmm.
to have a look at that. One thing that I always find really bizarre is that so many people could do with more energy and better health, but don't do anything about it. And it just seems bizarre to me that people would do that. I mean, I'm the world's worst for saying, oh, I was going to do this today. I was going to go for a walk today or whatever, and I haven't had time. But I normally then give myself a metaphorical slap and say, "Don't be
Hmm.
so ridiculous. You need to go and do it."
Well, you know, part of that, I have something that I teach my clients, and what I teach my clients, and women do it better than anybody anyway, is how to multitask. So if you have, and because if the part of the time, people don't do something because of time, energy, or money. And so if you can figure out how to like maximize that time so that you can get your exercise in, you can do who am I grateful for in my personal life and my business life, what's my biggest dream in my life so that you have that, that you have that picture and you keep on moving towards that picture, and who do I need to forgive? When I ask myself that question, when I'm doing this, I always think there's always somebody that comes to mind.
Yeah,
And, occasionally it's been yours truly too, because I'm thinking like, okay, like there's nothing you can do about it. Move on, bless yourself for the highest good, bless them, move on, and then, that part of it, focus on just exercising. So I have it broken up into segments. So it depends upon how many minutes you actually work out. Like this is what to do now, this is what to do then. And at the very end, because people need to journal, I think journaling keeps you accountable for what you said you're going to do or not do, or the top
yeah,
three things you need to do in a day, or the week, or the month, or the year,
yeah,
first quarter, second quarter, third, fourth quarter. You can hold yourself accountable by that, by just, take journaling and seeing where you're at. And you can all do it within an hour max. I
yes,
mean, you can do it less than that too. You'd have to keep the gratitude thing and probably the forgiving people part of it down to a minimum. But the point is that, when you're able to learn how to multitask better and more efficiently, when you come back, you take your shower and you get going.
yeah, yeah.
There's not any downtime, and you don't, and it doesn't make you feel exhausted before you
Mm.
even start, right? So that's
No,
really important.
that's great advice. I mean, when I do, so I work out every other day, and on the days I don't work out, I go for a walk for an hour. I do about almost 6 kilometers. And I don't know if you can hear my dogs. My dogs are fighting in the next room. Hopefully,
They're having fun.
they're having fun. Yeah.
They're eating your couch.
Oh, but I do my Spanish lessons. So when I go for a walk, I just put my earbuds in and I'll put
Hmm.
on my Spanish lessons and just keep repeating it to help me learn Spanish. So you're right, multitasking is really, really key. Another
Well,
thing,
if you would like to learn your Spanish a little bit faster and easier, when you go to do that, just like set your pace before you do that. Tell yourself, all the Spanish that I learned today, I will remember forever, you know, and then
very good
do a
advice.
tapping point, like, touch your fingers, like tap your elbow,
Yes.
something like this, tap your wrist, and then listen to the tape. And then, then when you get done, and then tap your wrist the same place again to anchor it. I used to study languages on an airplane going from Boston to Rome or Florence or London. That was an easy one for me, unless I was going to Scotland and I had to figure out what the heck they were saying. I could not. I had to watch Braveheart 1,000 times. I still have a hard time listening to a Scottish accent. Sorry, everybody, if you're from up there. But when you do that, then you're focused in, and your brain has the ability to learn a lot easier. Like, it's a good lesson to teach children who are, like, have learning situations, or for anybody who wants to, like, maximize their time and their energy and while they're learning something. But that's a really good way to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another fantastic tip. Pat, we are out of time.
Oh, darn.
I know it's been such
Yeah.
great fun having you on, and you are just full of so many wise, amazing hints and tips for people. I'm going to put all the links up in the show notes so everyone will know how to get hold of you. I'll have your website, your email, and the links to the free discovery call, the free health snapshot, and the free download of being more productive upon waking. And also all your social media links as well. They'll all be there for everyone. So if you want to get hold of Dr. Pat and chat through anything or find out more about her program, then the links are there. Pat, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you too. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's just like, you're one of my favorite. I told you when I got on that I was talking to someone just after I met you, and they went, "Oh my God, you know Jill Bennett." And I just thought, going like, "Oh my, it's such a small world." It is, and we all,
Oh,
like, I think we gravitate towards people who we have that, those special bonds with, And
yes.
it was such a pleasure to be here today, and for your audience, and to be and support you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's show. Check out all the links to the resources mentioned in today's episode and all my freebies in the show notes. See you next time.